Pleasure. All right, everybody, welcome. Very nice to see you here. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to get into it. Um, so this is a Beehive product deep dive and roadmap for anybody who is interested in what we're doing. Maybe you're a customer, a prospect, maybe a competitor, and you're sneaking around. All totally acceptable. And we're going to dive into quite a bit today. Just a few notes. Feel free to chime in with questions. You can use the Q&A box. You can just chime in via chat. Ask questions throughout. This is incredibly transparent, hiding nothing. I'm going to show you a bunch of very raw designs throughout the process, some real product stuff, show you how people are using the product and whatever more. So we will dive into it. So don't be shy, ask questions. And thank you to everybody who continues to join. So, who are we? This is what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to introduce myself and say, who are we? And then for each of these, we'll call them features or product sets. I'm going to talk about the product, the roadmap, and the vision. The product is what we have today and how companies are using it. The roadmap is what's coming out in the next month or two. And the vision is, a couple years ahead. Wouldn't it be amazing if this stuff existed? We're going to do that for physical risk, transition risk, governance, the actual report that you need to write, or reporting in general, and policy. And so I'm very excited to get into all of this. I do a webinar every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And honestly, this is my favorite, partially because I love to talk, and also partially because I'm really proud of the product and I think it's really cool. And so, who are we? So, my name is Adriel. I am the founder and CEO of Beehive. Beehive does what's called enterprise climate risk management, which means we help our customers understand their exposure to natural disasters and to an economy impacted by climate change and report on it. So, those who don't know, there's a law called SB 261 in California that requires that by January 1st, 2026, any company, any US company that has $500 million in revenue and does business in California needs to publish this thing called a TCFD report. Traditionally, this process, which has been around for like 10 years or so, of publishing these reports and doing these assessments is a 6-month consulting engagement that costs $200,000. And you got a PDF at the end. And we're taking that, turning it into something that's done in an hour, turning it into something that is kind of always on. Natural disasters are always on. It's not what did happen a year ago and then you're done. This is Unfortunately, there's one in America every 2 weeks that costs over $1 billion. So it's really an always on thing. And then really embedding AI throughout it all. So with that setup, let's start by talking about physical risks. So the problem that we're solving with physical risks is that traditionally assessments aren't data driven and they're very limited in scope. Meaning, if you engage a consultant and you say, hey, I want to understand my physical risk exposure, what they're going to do is ask you, all right, great, send me 5 or 10 of your biggest offices or factories. And you're going to say, wait a minute, I have 50 offices or factories around the world. And I also have tens of thousands of employees and data centers and other types of assets. What about those? And the consultant's going to hold on. I'm just a person. I can only research so much. We're just going to look at your 10 largest regions or areas or factories. So it's limited in scope. It's also not always data driven. What they often do, not always, but what they often do is basically do a lot of research and say, oh, you have a warehouse in Marin County. Let's Google Marin County wildfire history. Let's Google Marin County hurricane history. And we found that there have been some wildfires, but no hurricanes. So great. Hurricane risk low, wildfire risk medium. Moving on to the next one. And that's just not good enough for any actual value. It's interesting to know that there have been some wildfires there in the county in general. But it's not good enough to know for any real value, and it's certainly not good enough for a real disclosure. So here's what our product does today. What you're able to do in here is get an automated physical risk assessment that is useful in seconds and get it at a very broad scope, meaning thousands and thousands of assets. There's no limit to the number of assets you can do globally with high detail. So you can come in here and you can say, hey, I want to see what wildfire risk looks like in America. And what does it look like in 30 years if climate change is really bad? And what about hurricane risk that we actually just launched last night? There's hurricane risk in America. And what about heat wave risk? And maybe I want to see all my employees that have just high or medium high risk from floods. Here's where they are. And maybe you want to see what this looks like in Europe. I don't know if I have many employees in here. I guess I have some. Here's what it looks like in Europe. And I'm like, oh, yeah, London, this is where my CEO lives. I want to understand why the flood risk is what it is. And so there's an audit trail here to say we made this assessment because it's in above the 87th percentile. These are sort of the floodplains that are covering this area. Here's how we expect this risk to rise over time. And so these sorts of like detailed audit trails, we call them, are how you can actually get really specific and useful information. So if we're worried about hurricanes, or they're called cyclones broadly, and I want to see all my cyclone risk, my hurricane risk in the United States. And I say, you know what? I have a really important factory here. Why is cyclone risk so high? Well, this is what we expect. We expect category one hurricanes to happen this or 30% of the time, there's probably going to be a category one hurricane, 10% of the time, category two hurricane, so on and so forth. So, like, this is what you're actually preparing for. So, just not saying, oh, arbitrarily, it's a 7 out of 7. That sounds really bad. Like, here's why. Here's what you should expect. And so, this allows you, A, to disclose something very useful to an investor, which is a short term problem here. But B, go a little bit further and actually like know what you're dealing with to run some mitigation strategies around. So those are some cool things that you can do today in here. You can see this information a couple of other ways. So you can see it sort of in a table format. So if you just want to get a quick filter, maybe you want to look up where you live. Actually, I wonder if I did this. 11121. That's my zip code, right? I thought myself, and you're like, oh, looks like what do I have here? I've got no wildfire risk. Makes sense. I'm right outside of New York. Flood risk and some hurricane risk. All that makes perfect sense in New York. I can come in here and like find myself on the map. Let's see, there you go. Zoom me in. Here's me on the map. So you can do that. You can also export this as a CSV, which is really important. A lot of customers have been using this to basically get a lot deeper into this modeling. So they can say, hey, I have hundreds, or our average customer, I think, has 2,200 assets, we call them. That could be employee zip codes, offices, data centers, warehouses, whatever. That's a lot to actually look at. So they export it as a CSV and do a bunch of analysis and say, what percentage of my employees have high hurricane risk or whatever. So we're doing that in the spreadsheet, and so we actually built a better way of doing it. We built out this reports tab here, and so you could automatically ask questions like that. You can say, "Hey, I'm curious of my offices, which ones have medium or high risk in the United States and Europe." Looks like I have 11 offices that have heat risk, 7 that have high flood risk. How does that change in the future? What about the percentage of my office? Because that matters more to me. What about my employees? Right, I have some employees with cyclone risk. It's under 20%, fairly negligible percentage have wildfire risk. So if I'm going to do anything, I should focus on hurricane safety. Or you can come in here and say, I'm curious, where in the country do I have assets that have the highest levels of risk? Got it. Here's where they are. It's in New York, Texas, Florida. What about the highest level of, I just decided cyclone risk is my issue. Where should I focus on that? Oh, wow. Looks like New York has the most assets with cyclone risk. That's probably employees, followed by Florida. If I'm going to focus on educating people about hurricane safety anywhere, I should focus on my New York and my Florida constituents, my New York, my Florida employees, and maybe next focus on North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, because there's only one person in Texas, and maybe it'll just be too difficult to customize information for them. So that's all what exists today. Here's a couple things that are coming on the roadmap in the next couple weeks. So Asia, Canada, and Mexico. Right now, we have the US in North America, obviously, but we don't have Canada or Mexico. Those will launch by the end of the month, I hope, maybe early August. We have an August 4th goal on that, so we'll see how that lands. And we have India, and we have, here's just so you can see India, wildfire risk, fun fact, very red, very heat risk, hot place. And we have the Middle East, but we do not have like all, and we have Europe kind of through here, I think through Turkey. Let's see what Europe is actually. I'm not positive. Yeah, Europe goes before Turkey, stops at Turkey. But Asia will go basically from Turkey all the way up through Mongolia. I don't think we're including Russia in that assessment. And then down to China, Japan, the islands, Indonesia we have as part of Oceania. But then you're going to get the rest of Asia. So that's coming, geographic expansion over the next couple of weeks. Asia should be live next week. Um, we're going to launch Risk AI, which is basically right now, these reports are pretty good because you can kind of ask some standardized questions and get some answers and take some screenshots, put them into pitch decks. But you probably want to do more. So for example, earlier here, I showed you, you could ask the question, hey, where do I have employees that have high risk scores here? But what if you wanted to know exactly which zip codes these were? Or if you wanted to know this is 21 employees across how many zip codes? Do they all live in one place or are they spread out across 21 zip codes? Or if you wanted to say, I want to see how New York hurricane risk changes over time. You can't do that very well in this format. But so we're going to create an AI right on top of this where you'll be able to ask those deeper questions just in the way you're using any AI today, but it's trained on all of your risk data so you can pull out those insights a lot faster. So that's coming fairly soon. Hopefully next week. We'll see. And then quantification. So this is one of those raw examples. This is going to take us a little while longer to build. But quantification basically says, as a company, great. I told you that you have, 121 assets or employees or whatever this is that have high heat wave risk. That doesn't actually tell you much in terms of dollar terms. Like, does that mean you're going to lose $1 million, $10 million, no dollars at all? Like, what does having high heat wave risk mean for the business? Um, and what this quantification is going to allow you to do is to come in here and there's a very raw design. So, don't judge too much. We're clearly working on this actively. You'll be able to like click around and say, I want to see the impact, to my employees of floods and heat waves, or ask AI something similar. And it'll basically come out and we'll explain how these formulas work. I won't dive too deep into this unless you have questions and you wanna, and basically tell you, hey, we calculated you have $2.3 million worth of risk. And when we're thinking about this calculator, this quantification tool, there's a few principles that matter to us. First is that we're as transparent as possible in our formulas and in the math. So we want to like show you the actual formula that we use right here. We want to allow you to export this as a CSV so you can go see how the math came out. Because it's impossible to get right. Like 2.3 million is such a specific number to project off of, will a hurricane even happen or not? And if it does, will a data center go down or not? Or will your employees lose work time or not? Like these are all such difficult things to calculate that we want to say, hey, look, we're just giving you our version of it. Here's everything so you can believe, so you can believe for yourself that this is the right way to do it, wrong way to do it. We're sort of setting up the basics there. So that's thing one. Transparency is very important. Thing two is we want to give you a lot of control. And so what you'll be able to do in here is actually set up what we call parameters. So you'll be able to, sorry, let me find my screen here. You'll be able to come in here and say, hey, I think an employee is worth, an employee's work day is worth $150 a day or $300 a day or $50 a day, whatever it's worth. So if an employee loses, in this version, if they lose 3 days of work because of a terrible wildfire, they would lose 3 times 150, $450 for that one employee. Maybe you think heat waves are not a big issue at all because you have wealthy employees who live in fancy apartment buildings and they won't suffer at all. But maybe wildfires are a huge issue for employees because of whatever reason. And so you can say, hey, when heat waves strike, no employee loses any days of work ever. I don't care how bad it is. When a wildfire strikes, I think they might lose, a full week of work if if the worst wildfire happens. And so let's predict that. So we want to give you the tools to set up these parameters, and we're just kind of giving you an interface for these calculator. This is a really difficult product to get right. We've been working on this for months, going back and forth in design, showing this to customers, like figuring out the right way to do this, because what we don't want is for somebody to go to their CFO and say, hey, Beehive told me we have $2.3 million worth of risk. And the CFO says, I disagree, Beehive is wrong. We want to say we're not right or wrong. Like, here's our formulas. You guys have full control over this. And we also want to make sure the CFO doesn't say, oh my God, Beehive is 100% right. I'm going to go invest $1 million right now because I think it'll save me $1.3 million later. Like, I want you to use this. I want customers to use this as a gut check, as a like better, a little more quantified, a little more scientific tool to at least get an order of magnitude, right? If we say there's $2 million worth of risk, it's not exactly 2.3. It's probably between 1 million and 5 million. It's probably not 100,000. It's probably much more. And it's probably not 10 million. It's probably less, but it's ballpark there. And so if you are a billion revenue company, and for you, $2.3 million is like 0.1%, 0.2% of your total revenue, you probably don't care too much about that 0.2% of your revenue. But if you are a 50 million revenue business and this $2 million risk is 4% of your revenue, all of a sudden we're talking something much more significant. So this is just meant to be used as a tool. So if you have thoughts or ideas, I am very, very down to talk about this quantification tool because it's really important for us to get right, and it's a very difficult tool to get right. I saw earlier someone asked a question, and Neen asked a question, what about customers and suppliers? That's a great question. So right now, today, we only support adding um, data centers, employees, and offices. This is going to change hopefully tomorrow. We're rebuilding. This is actually the very first thing that we ever built. You can see like the font is different than the rest of our website. We built this like a year ago and haven't changed it. This is all getting a makeover tomorrow, where instead of being kind of funneled into these three options, you'll be able to create any type of asset you want. And there might be groups. There'll be a supply chain group. And maybe in the supply chain group, data centers one option, warehouses one option, third-party manufacturer is one option. Or you can customize your own and just call it supply chain. Under maybe there'll be a facilities option that includes office or a data center that you own or a warehouse that you own or a third kind of option that you want to do. So for example, we work with a healthcare company that has they have fertility clinics. They have like regular women's health, like OB clinics. They have labs where they do a lot of testing. Those are all different types of assets. They'll be able to come in here and say, I'm going to input another OB clinic, or I'm going to input a fertility clinic, or I'm going to input a lab, or I'm going to input a customer of mine that I really care about. So we'll be able to do that really soon. So that's a really good question, Neen. Actually, to go even further, I think customers and looking at risk of customers for certain types of companies is super impactful. So let me be specific. If you are a company that serves small, medium businesses, especially small, medium businesses in the physical retail world, then disasters really impact your business. So let's say you're a company like Toast or Lightspeed, these payments processing companies that serve restaurants. When a hurricane hits New Orleans, and if you have 100 customers in New Orleans, and now those 100 customers all close down their restaurants for a month because they're all destroyed, all of a sudden you just lost a significant amount of revenue. And if from across those 100 customers, if each one of them earns you $10,000 a month in revenue, that's 100 customers, they never do public math, but what is that, $1 million in revenue? You just lost $1 million in revenue for that 1 month. But if you can know that you have 100 customers there and the potential to lose $1 million in revenue in a month, and you can invest in programs to get people up and running faster, maybe you help those customers out with insurance, maybe you help them with trainings, maybe you match funding for resiliency, like a new ceiling, or you do whatever, and you can drop that month off that they take from 1 month to a week, and they can actually open up faster than their restaurant competitors who don't use you because of that work. You'll have saved a lot of money and your customers love you. Another tangible example of this is when the wildfires hit LA. I know a payroll company that serves like SMB. So they serve a lot of like retailers, so florists and stuff like that. But they also serve like small services businesses like law firms and like small law firms, like 2 to 5 lawyers. And they have a lot of people in the LA area. And so what happened is that they had 600 customers that turned off payroll for a month because those businesses were so impacted. That's 600, and they're the only revenue that this company I'm talking about gets is like a percentage of the payroll that they process. That's a really significant hit that they took. And so if you serve SMBs, getting your risk to your customers is super important. If you serve large enterprise, like if I don't know, Google is a customer of yours, there could be a horrible, horrible wildfire wherever Google's office is, and it's probably fine. Like your revenue's probably not going away because they're just so distributed and so global. Um, but if you serve SMBs and one fire can close down a business, that's a really big issue. So that's a really good question, Neem. And I think that's also one of the ways we try to differentiate ourselves is we don't charge per asset. There's some physical risk products that say, hey, every asset we run a risk assessment on is whatever, 150 bucks or whatever it is. So if you want to put in 1,000 assets, it's $150,000. We don't. We say there's a flat price for everything in the software. You put in as many assets as you want. So you have thousands of employees all over the world. Great. If you have tens of thousands of customers all over the world, great. Like put them all in here. I think the value that we try to provide is what do you do with this information? How do you run reports? How do you respond to these disasters? How do you report on this? In terms of I talk about in a second, whatever else. So good question. Thank you. Oh, there's a Q&A going. I didn't notice that. Okay, cool. Is this available for people who are looking to buy a home as well and want to figure out the best location to buy and live, or is it mostly for corporate businesses? Asks Kelly. Great question. No, this is for corporate businesses. I do know some of our customers, I showed you this, like I put in my zip code, are like, oh yeah, I live here. Like, I'm curious what this looks like for my house. What I recommend if you're buying a home or if you're curious, First Street is a basically competitor of ours. They're really great. And so you can type in like, I don't know, hurricane. This is my address. You'll see First Street is basically always the first thing that comes up. And so you can come in here, and they're an amazing modeling company. They're really great. So they'll show you the wind factor, or the fire factor, or the flood factor, or whatever of this particular place. I live kind of over here area. And so like this is useful if you're buying a home and it's free. They have paid versions that are much higher end, but this is really cool to show you like here's some previous hurricanes that hit or floods that hit this area that caused flooding, and here's the date, and here's what happened. And so they give you really, really amazing information. Oh, that's cool. They have this thing about who's protected by adaptation. That's really interesting. Um, so there's a lot of cool stuff they can do. So if you're interested in buying a home or using it for that case, check out First Street or just type in your zip code and hurricane risk or whatever, and they'll pop up. And Terry, I didn't notice your question, but Terry just asked, can you upload supplier location data to assess risk from supply chain logistics perspective? As you asked that a few minutes ago, but I think I answered that. Basically, very soon, yes. Many of our customers are technology companies. Their really only supplier of note is a data center. Their law firms distributed, their accounting firms distributed, and their data center goes down. That's an issue. But if you're, for example, we're working with a healthcare company, they get like a lot of IV fluid from one particular location. If that location is impacted and they can't produce IV fluid, that really hurts the healthcare company. And so that becomes a big issue. So all great questions. I appreciate that. Oh, there's another one. Oh, just a thank you in chat. Keep them coming. Okay. I'm going to switch over to transition risks for a moment. So transition risks. So the problem is tabletop transition risk exercises are super time consuming and not data based. So what does that mean? Traditionally, when a consultant is hired to do a transition risk assessment, and remember, transition risk is basically saying what risks or opportunities exist to your business in an economy impacted by climate change. The way that works is the consultant gathers a bunch of your executives in a room and they run some conversations. Then they go interview everyone individually, and they'll go to your head of marketing, your head of IT, and your head of finance, and your head of HR, and say, what risks do you think exist to the business? And the marketer or the HR leader or the IT person, they never really thought about climate change. It's not their job. It's like, oh, I don't know, like probably not going to be good. Like maybe the IT person's like, data centers might get more expensive, or maybe the marketing person's like, I don't know, maybe we can't be too insensitive about marketing our plastic products. Like I'm not so sure. That's how it works. And then they kind of organize all this, and we think that's crazy. Um, it's very time consuming. It's not super database. Like, what did your marketer know about climate change? Um, but there's a better way of doing this using AI and basically saying, hey, what if the consultant just knew all this stuff about you already, came to you with the likely risks and opportunities, and then told you your job is not to like identify the risks and opportunities. We identified it. Your job is to discuss it and then mitigate it if you think is appropriate. So use that executive time, but not in discovery. Use that executive time in strategy about what you're actually going to do about this. So, what exists today? Today, we have this library of a few dozen transition risks, opportunities, and physical risks that have basically are categories of what has been reported by others. For any of these, you can see we have the number of disclosures. This basically means we have the number of other companies who have said something similar. So let's say we have this category of opportunity called expansion of existing low emissions goods and services that maybe I can like sell more low emissions products. Here's a bunch of companies that have said similar things. Take Two Interactive, some gaming company, said they could increase revenue by develop products with low carbon goods. Workday, the HR company, said we can develop more climate mitigation ESG for services. CarMax said maybe there's opportunities and services around expanding low emissions offerings. So these are like examples of what other people have said. And so what happens today is when we start working with a client, we come in here and say, all right, what makes sense for this client? What are the majority of its peers saying? And we can say, hey, maybe if we're working with a pharmaceutical company, what has Walgreens reported? All right, great. They reported this one. What did Walgreens say about this? Maybe I picked a bad example because Walgreens is at the bottom here. What did Walgreens say about this? Does that make sense? Got it? Yes. Cool. I'm going to assign this one. What else? I think Acadia is a peer of mine. I'm going to see if I want to assign that one. Then the customer comes in here and says, do I like this risk? Does it make sense for me based on what I know? Um, do I like this language? Maybe I don't like the word behavior. I'm going to delete that and change it to whatever style. I don't know. Do I change it to whatever I want? Maybe there's things here that I don't like. I want to change to whatever I want. I'm going to change it back to behavior for now. That's probably a better word. And then you can see what Pierce said. Oh, I love what Ford said. I'm going to actually use Ford's language here in my own to make this relevant. And so that's how it works today. And you can say, you can identify, hey, I think this is going to be over a short time horizon with medium impact and a high likelihood of that, whatever. All of this, I'll show you how this pops up in the report. But the customer basically does a bunch of this work here with us. That's what exists today. And those peer answers are super valuable because everyone's trying to be what I call aggressively average. They're trying to say, how do I do a good job, but also not disclose too much because what's the benefit of that? And definitely not disclose too little because I don't want to be seen as someone who doesn't take stuff seriously. So what they're going to do is say, here's my peers. In this particular case, I set up my peers as Ford and Take-Two and Zendesk. What did they say? Let me use similar language. And I'm just curious, what did Delta and Expedia and Merck and SMP say about this? And if you want, you can be like, oh, I love what Merck said. And it'll just tell you it's on page 11 of this report. So you can click in here, scroll to page 11, and here's whatever one I clicked on, but here's kind of what they said there. So that's how customers use it today. What's coming next, and again, this is a design, but this will hopefully be live in a month, is really this whole process run by AI. Meaning the software and the AI already knows a lot of stuff about you. We know what geographies you're in. We know what industry you're in because you've set that up in your profile. You told us this is your industry. We know you're not a publicly traded company. We know this is your revenue. We know these are some of your peers. You've given us a bunch of documents. We have your 10K. We have your EHG report. We have your CD. We have all these things about you. So the AI should be able to say, knowing everything we know about you and knowing what all your peers have said and knowing everything, here's the risks that are relevant for you. And here's why we think so. So this design's a little ugly, but basically you'll come in here and say, all right, here's what we know about you. Here's some information. Like, does it all smell correct? Uh-oh. Hmm. There we go. I missed the button there. But does it all look correct? Here's the thing that we recommend that you do. And then maybe we'll be able to tell you, like, and here's why. Like, this is why, because you do business in California and the EU, and things are likely here, and you're in this industry, and that's why, here's the relevance, and here's what some peers have said. So basically be able to like automate that so you don't have to, or I don't have to go in there and click a sign, and we'll be able to explain it. So it's almost like think of this as like a really hardworking recent MBA grad who's going to tell you everything that she thinks about her decision. So you're going to say, hey, go figure this out. They're going to go figure this out, except it'll take 4 seconds instead of 4 years. And then they're going to tell you why they thought that. Now, maybe you disagree. Maybe you'll be like, actually, I don't think that, or, you don't know that we're actually leaving California. Like, that's not relevant anymore. And you'll unassign this. But it'll give you enough information that you'll be able to get to the actual like action and strategizing really, really quickly. So that's what's coming on the roadmap. And the vision is basically each of these risks that we identify, we have a module to like take care of these risks. So if you come in here and say, hey, there's a risk of like enterprise customer sustainability requirements changing, we want to be able to have a product that lets you track what all your customers expect of you in terms of sustainability. So you can actually mitigate this risk and not just know that it exists, but like we help you actually deal with the risk very quickly. So that's a bit about transition risks and what's going on here. Transition risks are strange. They're a little mushier than physical risks. They're a little like more hypothetical because you're looking many years out. Um, it's hard to predict a lot. There's also, honestly, fewer risks right now with how the government in the United States and also globally are responding to things like climate. So genuinely, there's just fewer risks, but it's just part of the process for something like SB 261 compliance, and so it's important to do. And our perspective is that that is often the most expensive part of a consultant's engagement. Our perspective, it is honestly one of the less useful parts. And at the same time, one of the parts that can be best done by AI to a pretty decent level. And if you want to go deeper, if you're like, oh, wow, like I actually think this is a very material risk that has high impact, like high likelihood of high impact or whatever, that I need a consultant to help me understand all this. Great. Go like hire a consultant to help you understand all this. I think that sounds amazing. But you don't have to do it for everything. Do it for the ones that you've decided are really the most material, and you really want to understand the best. So that's that. Feel free to ask any questions. Let's check our little Q&A box here. Where's our Q&A box? There we go. Okay, nothing there. Perfect. So we can move on. I'm actually going to stick this here for now. And there we go. That'll be cleaner. Okay, what's next? Let's talk about governance. Let's have a drink of water and talk about governance. Okay, governance. The problem we're solving here is that setting up climate risk governance for the first time, having these monthly meetings to review climate risk is confusing and time consuming. Meaning, if you haven't done this before, if you don't already have a system in place, or even if you do, and your governance structure is such that your ESG steering committee or risk team wants to review these risks on a quarterly basis, organizing all this information to be able to like run a meeting is super time consuming. We want to make that better. So right now it's a very simple product. We basically ask you which individuals on what committees are involved. So you'll be like, oh, oversight of my climate risk work is done by the ESG steering committee, which includes these people, by the audit committee of the board, and great. And they meet, monthly or quarterly or however often they meet. That exists today. Nothing beyond that. What the vision, and we're not working on anything here super soon, but the vision is that if you tell us that your ESG steering committee meets quarterly, we want to be able to use AI to provide you information to talk about at that quarterly meeting. And that information can include things such as, hey, you recently uploaded another 200 new employees who joined, 100 of which have high risks from floods or whatever. We want to give you that information and talk about. We want to tell you, hey, it is the next quarter is uh August through October. Last August through October, there were cyclones that hit these particular assets. We don't know what's going to happen this August through October. The whole point is that it's unpredictable. But like if last year happened this year and it hit these assets again, are we prepared or are we going to be really, really impacted? So we want to be able to generate these questions, talking points, topics for you. And that's not coming anytime soon, but it's sort of on the vision there. Okay. Any questions? Oh, great. Perfect. All right. We can move on to the report. So the problem we're solving here is that writing ESG compliance reports, and specifically we're talking about your TCFD aligned, currently called an IFRS S2 report, to comply with these laws takes a lot of time and expertise. The product we have today does it for you. So traditionally, you hire a consultant, they do all these assessments, review the risks. Maybe they write your report for you, or maybe not. They write your report for you. They go back for a month or 6 weeks and they clickety clack, type it all up, come back to you with a draft, and then you go make a bunch of edits. Or you don't want to pay the consultant to write the report, because honestly, you could write the report. It's not rocket science. And then you, in between all your 17 other jobs, go ahead and write this report. Big pain in the butt. That should be done by AI. So you can come in here, and for any question, the TCFD has these 4 sections and 11 questions throughout, all fairly standardized. And any question that's in here, AI can actually write the report for you. So it'll take all this information that's in the software, it'll take all your other disclosures and learn from your language, it'll take what your peers have said, and it'll say, here's how I would answer this question. And this answer is not perfect, but it's done immediately. For example, in an hour or 2 hours, we're kicking off with a new client. They've never even been in the software yet, and their report is done. AI wrote it. Now, they might want to come in here and make some edits. They might want to come in here and say, hey, Zendesk is a big peer of mine. How did Zendesk respond to these questions? Oh, I like Zendesk's answer more or less than I like the AI answer. And they're going to go in here and change it. But that first draft is done. And it's done in a second, and it's done basically for free. Because I don't think the value of that, I know the driver of people doing climate risk today is reporting and compliance, but I don't think that's the value. No one cares about another report. The report is just a way you communicate the good work that you've already done. But so AI writes the whole report. So that works really, really well. AI can answer any of these questions, and you get your disclosures for any of these things, and there's a bunch of cool stuff there. Division is honestly that other reports are automated like that as well. So other reports for climate risk come in. So CVP is a very common one. Probably a third of CDP is climate risk stuff. We should be able to automate that. But then there's also other things that we want to do here, like a benchmarking assessment, where if you say, hey, Zendesk is my most important comp, and I want to be better than Zendesk at everything. We want AI to basically run a gap assessment for you to say, hey, here's where we think Zendesk is better, whatever better means, maybe more transparent, more words, more numbers, whatever. And you're better at whatever, and you could benchmark those two. So things like that powered by AI are coming, because that's such a big part of the work stream for people who do this work. So that's a bit of the vision. Woo, talking for 40 minutes, man. That'll get you. Okay, let's talk about policy. So policy is a really interesting one, because this is almost all between roadmap and vision. So before I go to that slide, pretty much everybody is going to have some sort of risk. I actually should have pulled this up earlier. Let's add this in here. Pretty much everyone is going to say something like, there's a risk to us that there's enhanced emissions reporting obligations and new regulations require us to do all these different things that is going to cost us to increase our spend on such issues. Every report I've read has something like that. And so when I started asking companies, oh, you've disclosed that like this is a risk, how do you track these global regulations? Everyone says the same thing. They roll their eyes. They say it's a manual process where I read newsletters, I go to conferences, I talk to my friends, I Google stuff. And if I hear about a new law that might impact us, I put it into a spreadsheet. And when I have time, I read it, or I ask AI to tell me about it. And I kind of bring it to my lawyers and my outside counsel or consultants, and they look it out, all of it for me. And it's this like long manual process. This is the perfect application for AI. So the problem we're solving is keeping track of climate and environmental regulations all over the world is hard, manual, time consuming, and that causes people to miss laws, pay fines, causes a lot of issues. What you can do in our product today oops, wrong button. What you can do in a product today is search through hundreds of environmental laws. Like there's 226 environmental laws in here, and about 104 bills, and begin to understand them. So I don't know, you can just click a random one here. The biomethane procurement targets and goals, whatever, AB 6708 in California's. And you can ask AI to like summarize it for you to understand it a little bit better. Um, won't waste for this look, but this sort of works here where like AI can actually tell you which laws are relevant for you, and then it'll come in here and say, "Hey, here's all the laws that are relevant for you. There's some in California, some in other countries, some in Tennessee, and here's when the penalties are expected. Most of them are expected, or most laws have a penalty that's coming in past 2025, not in the past. Looks like maybe there's one in 2023, or a couple in previous years that have some penalties when they were enacted. And then you can come in here and understand them. This is fine. Honestly, we built this out like as a beta test to see if we like the product. We ran some pilots with like Atlassian and the Gap and Samsung, and they loved it. They were like, "Yeah, if you can really solve this problem for me, it's totally worth it." We paused work on this. Um, I don't know, 4 months ago probably, and we're gonna pick it back up in October as a huge priority because we have some customers who are buying Beehive to start next year specifically so we can track global regulations for them. And so what this is going to look like is we already know all this stuff about your business. I showed this to you already. I know how many employees you have. I know how much revenue you have. I know other disclosures that you have. I know the countries in which you do business. I know all these. I know what kind of industry you're in. We're going to tell the AI, hey, here's this law. Knowing what you know about this company, do you think this law applies? If you're 95% certain or more, put it in this bucket. If you are 95% certain that it's not applicable, put it in that bucket. And if you're unsure, put it in this bucket. And we'll go to the client and say, or the software goes to the client and says, hey, client, we found 3 new laws that we definitely think apply to you. Confirm that they do. We found 5 that we're uncertain about. We found 2 that we definitely think don't apply to you. Confirm that that's correct. And you'll be able to actually like track all this live in here where every time we find a new environmental law or a bill that is relevant to you, we tell you, hey, we found these new things. You come in here and say, yep, I agree. Use AI embedded in here to say, it doesn't make sense, does it not? You say, wow, I'm really uncertain about this. I'm going to send it to my lawyer because I want to get it right. You do a lot of that planning here. So there's going to be a huge effort, most of our effort really starting in like November. And I'm very, very excited about this because there's been a huge need, or let me rephrase that. I've been surprised by how much of a need this has been inside our companies, where like the pain that they express at wow, tracking these laws is so hard is really high. And that is kind of unsurprisingly true for some businesses. Like if you're a retailer with like a physical footprint like the Gap, yeah, I bet there's 1,000 environmental and energy and plastics and papers and PFAS laws that matter to you. If you're a software company like Atlassian, I'd kind of expect like can't be that hard. I'm totally wrong. Atlassian, as an example, has a full-time employee whose job it is to track some of these laws. That's really, really time consuming. And so that's the kind of problem that we're going to be solving here. I'm very excited for what that might look like. Okay. I think that's pretty much it. Oh, that part of the vision is I think you can imagine a newsletter like sending you out updates on relevant regulations, but just the ones that are relevant. It's all written by AI. So it's not like, hey, there's some new Italian law around plastics, and you receive this email, even though you're a US software company. That's a huge terrible experience. But if we tell you, hey, there's a update on a Tennessee data center law, and you have a Tennessee data center, then it becomes very, very interesting and relevant. So that's pretty much it, folks. Um, Happy to answer any questions about the product today, the roadmap, the vision, what we're working on. This is I try to be as transparent as possible. How customers are using us, what they like, what they don't like, whatever. Can be as transparent as possible. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a moment. There we go. So I can see everyone's Q&A and stuff. So if you have questions, we've got about 13 minutes left. If you have questions or thoughts or ideas, feel free to drop them into the chat or the Q&A. Parched. I am parched. What do we got, folks? What do we got? Don't be shy. Cool. Yep. Thank you, Nina. Yeah, customer and supplier functions. I thought it was gonna be tomorrow. Maybe it'll be like Monday or Tuesday. But yeah, within a week, those will all be out. Um, I think it's obviously if you even if you're a software company, but your customers are in the real world, so your customers are hospitals or restaurants, you really want to see that risk so you can sort of figure out how to like help them adapt. And I think that's really important. That was one of our very earliest ideas from when we first started the business of how do you give somebody that information about their customers. And again, that doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't make sense if your customers are like large global enterprises. Because if Procter and Gamble's Minneapolis office gets hurt by a flood, like you as one of their suppliers is probably fine. Um, and it doesn't work if you're a consumer business. Well, maybe it does. That's not true. If you're Uber and you have a million cars in New York and New York gets a little bit flooded, your business probably goes up because all of a sudden nobody wants to go in the subway. Like I don't know if you saw videos from this week, but it was insane. Everyone wants to take an Uber. But if it gets very, very, very flooded, no one's traveling, and so actually people are taking fewer Ubers. So maybe it works for consumer businesses, kind of. Just got to figure out how to get all that customer data in there. Um, and it works for if you serve, we'll call it SMBs, or like physical retail businesses. Um, but yeah, so I'm excited about that one. While everyone thinks very, very hard about their questions, I'm going to drop in our calendar of events here. So next week, I'm interviewing Donald Lee, who's the founder of Calix Global, which is one of the big ratings agencies for carbon offsets. So if you are thinking about carbon offsets, come and join. And that'll be really interesting. We're talking talk about the risk of buying bad offsets and whether the opportunity still exists of buying quality offsets and how to make that work. The week after, talking to my friend Brendan Maloney, who is the sustainability lead at DocuSign. That'll be on July 31st. And that's always scheduled for now, but we do this every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Sometimes it's something like this, sometimes it's an interview. We got a lot of stuff going on. Um, Nina said one area where we get pushback is that we went virtual during COVID, and there's a belief that we could do it again. That would not be that disruptive. So I think that's not unfair, right? Like, let's say something. Let's say you're actually. I have a lot of customers who are like mostly remote businesses. Totally true. And so, in aggregate, if you're have 1,000 employees and 30 of them are in the LA area, and it's such bad luck that all 30 of them are in the like heavy wildfire impacted area of LA, for the business, as long as they're all safe and alive and stuff, it's not that disruptive, right? Like it's not really that problematic. It's maybe for the teams, it slows them down a little bit, especially if you're white collar work, you grab your laptop, work out of a hotel for a little bit. But I don't think that's the only point here. I think if 30 out of 1,000 employees might get displaced by a wildfire, I think there's so many opportunities to show up as an employer for those employees if you know that information and have the right tools. Imagine if you had the context that say, hey, here's my 30 employees who might get hurt by wildfire. I'm going to set up a system where if a wildfire is coming, I'm going to know that. I'm going to email them and say, hey, we have a program where we're going to sponsor $500 of your hotel expenses. Get out of there. Like, don't worry about the money. Get out of there now, and we're going to pay for that. Or you email their manager and say, hey, we know that Joey might be impacted by a wildfire. Don't bother him right now. Like he might be taking care of his family. Give that a moment and you can set that up. Or You say these are the 30 who might be impacted by wildfires. And I know one company who does this. They're not that big. They have like 700 employees. They basically do a disaster relief or disaster training, preparedness training for every employee, and they set them a disaster kit. So like whatever is in a bottle of water, a fire blanket, whatever, like a go bag everywhere. So what if you were able to do that? So like I agree with you, Nina, that if you go remote, it wouldn't be fully disruptive. That's one of the strengths of being remote. It builds resilience, but I don't think that's the end of the story. I think there's a lot you can do for your employee. Terry, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Nina said, "How can Beehive help teams get a better handle internally on operational impacts to the supply chain and customer disruptions, as well as just working overtime and eating the extra work as soon as the revenue impact can be absorbed?" Um, Operation. Well, it depends for the company. I need to understand a little bit more about what you mean by just working overtime and eating the extra work. Um, but I think that's the stuff we need to get into, right? Like I think our first year, we're about a year old, has been around measuring these risks, and that's fine. But I don't think that's actually the most interesting thing you can do. I think like responding to or being proactive about these risks is much more interesting. So, for example, you asked about operational impacts to customers. What if we built a product? Um, uh, oh, and then you clarified, I guess, what is the disaster cost in terms of loss of productivity, missed innovation? That I don't know when you join exactly, but that's what that calculation impact is exactly for. We're going to quantify what how much money you might lose because of these disruptions and give you a number that you can go to and say, hey, here's the potential dollars at risk. But even that is not yet interesting because someone says, oh, wow, God, it's scary. What do I do about that? And we want to be giving you the tools to actually do something about that. So that customer example I was giving you, what if we built trainings that you can then send to your customers around disaster response? What if we, minorly obsessed with the following idea, and we're not going to do this anytime soon, but hopefully it paints a picture of how we're thinking. Um, there's companies that have a disaster relief fund where if you as an employee get impacted by a disaster, you can apply to get $1,000 or something. Uh, those disaster relief funds are amazing. They're so impactful. They are just so comforting to people to know that that exists. They're also incredibly time consuming and burdensome to run between like filling in your application, getting the money. It could be many weeks, which is a huge issue. It takes forever to look through. How do you judge if this application is good or bad or whatever? All of that could be productized and be done for a tiny amount of cost. And those are the kind of products we want to build. Where imagine if we set up your whole disaster relief fund and you just put $100,000 in the bank account or whatever. And then we set up triggers to say, if a category 5 hurricane goes within 3 miles of someone's house, they automatically get an email saying they're allowed to apply and they don't have to like refill all this information on a PDF. They just click the button and submit it and we move the money right away. Like those are ways that we can get into the flow of how do you actually help people respond to these issues and do so by lowering your costs of running one of these programs. Those are very difficult things to do. Those are the kinds of ways we'd like to be kind of more involved there and help people actually like again respond to these risks. I think measurements was required by law and is what is traditionally very difficult and slow and hard. And it's required. But I think the real value, the real interesting stuff happens once you start like adapting to these risks. Any other questions? We'll give it another minute. Okay, perfect. Well, I appreciate everybody. Thank you so much um, for joining. I really appreciate it. I hope to see you on a future webinar next week, the week after, any Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll talk to everybody soon. Bye.